Professor Obijofor Aginam is still with me, and of course, the last time I checked, even though he's in Nigeria, he's still the director, UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development in New Delhi. Prof, I did a little bit of research about your works, and this particular book you wrote, Global Health Governance, International Law and Public Health in a Divided World, and it highlights some global disparities. Has this gap widened or narrowed for Africa, particularly in 2026?
Well, I mean, I can guess that they've widened. I don't have the actual statistics now.
Okay.
You know, it needs to be but the thing about the disparities, between countries is the fact that you can look at it from different angles. The first is the gap in, say, infant mortality. Okay, life expectancy at birth, for instance, which is the one I looked at the most when I looked at. So if you look at, the countries like Japan that have very high, almost the highest in the world, and look at, most countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, you have a gap of almost 25-30 years, so it's 75 for 80 in some of these countries, and then 45 for 50. So given what has happened, it has, globally speaking, public health has improved, in so many globally. Okay, life expectancy is down, infant mortality, life expectancy is up, infant mortality is down, maternal mortality is also down. But if you disaggregate it and look at what is happening in Africa, so yes, even though it has improved globally, okay, but in Africa, have they improved? That's the answer. So I can, you can actually, you and I can speculate that this gap has widened, especially if you look at some of the highly industrialized countries like Singapore, Japan, and some countries in Europe, vis-a-vis the sub-Saharan African countries. And internally, there's also disparities within countries, which is what we tend to forget. Okay, if you look at our country, Nigeria, the disparities between the rich and the poor in the last 3 or 4 years, what do we see? Okay, so the middle class is shrinking, shrinking at a very fast rate, and wealth is concentrated in maybe in 10 or 15 or 20% of the population. Those that, and then 80-70% are poor, not just managing, but they are poor by any standards.
Okay, as director of UNESCO, Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development in Africa, how are you using transformative education to build the next generation of African health advocates?
Brilliant question. This is I took on this job just about 18 months ago, and we do know that UNESCO is the UN agency that has a mission on education, science, and culture to use this to promote peace. So the institute I'm leading now is one of UNESCO's Category 1 institutes, with a mission to use education for peace, as a way to transform development in countries. We work basically focusing on SDG 4, which is the education goal of the SDGs, and we look at 4.7, which talks about culture of peace and all of that. So the very first thing we do is to work with to develop the concept of education for peace in a way that people understand, okay, because not everybody has the same meaning of what peace means. So when you say education for peace, what does it really mean? Okay, we do know that education systems around the world have emphasized cognitive learning of subjects, exams, emphasis on jobs, People want to, graduate with the highest, standards and all of that. But the question is, are they complete human beings? If they don't have the competencies for critical thinking, for mindfulness, for empathy, for compassion. These are the competencies for education for peace. Okay, so and if we developed quite a lot of interventions from kindergarten, what we call the early childhood education, to high school, to university, and to the informal sector. Okay, the SDG 4 talks about lifelong learning opportunities. Lifelong learning means that a lot of learning occur, outside the education institutions. Okay, it's not just what happens in schools, but also, at this thing. So we bring all of this together and place it at the center of education. So education systems must strive to, marry, this cognitive mastery of disciplines, academic disciplines, with these competencies of education for peace. Okay, that's when you have, produce, students and graduates that are fully aware of the global implications of their actions. Global citizenship education, for instance. You produce leaders who are kind, who are empathetic, who are compassionate towards, their fellow human beings, and you make them, they become competitive, graduates, internationally. So it is a power. We work with UNESCO's 194 member states. Health is actually a component of all of this, because if you talk about, well-being, okay, which is one of the big, this of the equation, there's now a whole lot of. In fact, I was talking to a committee of Indian vice chancellors of universities about how to make university campuses, much more, much more responsive to issues of, well-being to students. So there is this anxiety, pressure to do well, even from families and from parents. Okay, so there's now a very high rate of, suicides. Okay, in so many countries, even in industrialized countries, Japan, India is having the same problem. So I had this about 25 vice chancellors, and I was talking about how education for peace competencies can address this. So it's part of the Indian national education policy, which has something they call the universal human values there. So why is Nigeria? Okay, that's I'm Nigerian. I'm running the institute. But if I take this discussion to the Federal Ministry of Education, how will it be received? Okay, so these are some of the questions that we understand. I also met the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations in charge of youth affairs 2 months ago, and they've just launched what they call the flagship for youth well-being. Okay, youth mental and social well-being is now official program of the UN, and he wants me to to my institute to partner with them to help, because they have to their mandate is global, and that these are issues that actually affect young people in in large numbers. Okay, so how to address this increasing anxiety and in extreme cases, young people taking away their lives, so that's what a big component of education for peace we do, and I hope that I will be able to work with young people to address these.
Okay, as I was just scavenging the net on the things you do, and then I came across your prescription about traditional medicine as being relegated to the margins, and I was wondering, how does this make globalization predatory in African context?
It is, because you have Africa is not a hotspot, on a rich, hot pot of the future. Okay, if you look at where do you have the thickest and the biggest forests in the world? Amazon, Congo Basin, and Central Africa. These are this thing. So the richness of the biodiversity in those places holds a very, very significant promise for the future. Discoveries for medicines. Okay, the point is that there's a dichotomy between what we call the orthodox Western medicine, which, you know, some of these synthetic drugs that are made, you know, vis-a-vis the traditional, you know, medicine, that the use of herbs, okay, medicinal uses of herbs. So now the question about is very complicated, because if you look at things like artemisinin for malaria, okay, and see how it was, you know, invented in China, it was 100% from forest, you know, herbs, okay. The bark of a tree was, you know, synthesized, and they found that, you know, it has the rest is history. India has done very well. Ayurveda medicine is plant-based, 100% plant-based. Okay, they've developed now over the years, and you know, and to the extent that that dichotomy between orthodox and this is now, you know, very much. You know, I was in India when I served on the WHO committee on developing the Global Center for Traditional Medicine, and we saw this. We went to Ayurveda hospitals, labs, and all of this, you know, places. So. But in Africa, what do you have? You know, we're still having. So these are the kinds of things that, you know, the government has a role to play. Bring all these actors together. Now, but the problem is that when you talk about traditional medicine, people lump a lot of things together.
Yeah.
Oh, witchcraft, sorcery, you know, faith healing, all of these things. They are not. You can begin to unpack those things. We're talking about medicinal uses of herbs. Okay. And that's really a huge potential. It's a huge market. So develop this, and you know, otherwise there's the charge of biopiracy. You know, so many of these big pharmaceutical corporations, they've pirated some of these things. You know, in Latin America, one of those countries where quinine was, you know, was this thing. Indigenous populations in these countries were spent time, because indigenous knowledge, you know, local knowledge.
Yes.
They saw monkeys when the baby monkeys are sick. The mother will get one of those leaves and, you know, give it, and then, you know, so that's how they knew. And then, you know,
they observed.
They observed it, and then but a Western pharmaceutical company took it and went to a lab, you know, in medicine, and so biopiracy, and it's happening. They deny it, but we know it's happening. Okay, so a whole lot of indigenous knowledge, you know, and I did aspect of my PhD on this, and when I was asking some of the tertiary, I don't mean you know, sorcerers or diviners or whatever. I mean the herbalists who use the herbs.
Yes.
So if you ask them, how do you know that this particular herb is the cure for fever or for malaria? They say, no, but our grandfathers have been doing that. You know, so it's, you know, it's transferred from, you know, so those kind of, but
yeah, but people still look at those people with disdain.
I know, that's the thing. So it's not yeah. So that's the thing. We need. I think you need to go and study. Go and look at Ayurveda in India and see what they've done. It's amazing. So that's just my response to this. If Nigeria is serious, look at how India, you know, and now, you know what happens? If you, Ayurveda is ancient Indian medicine, from herbs, totally from plants. Every hospital you see in India now, there's a Ayurveda hospital and there's a conventional hospital. Women choose to go for antenatal anywhere you want, you know. So they call it co-location, they locate them, you know. I met one of the directors of it, and that if you study medicine in India now, you can study MBBS medicine, okay? You can study MBBS Ayurveda. they write it in their listing. So they've gone a long way.
Okay, as we each into opening the talk lines, let me just, you know, brain drain is something that you can't just avoid discussing in the Nigerian interview. But from my perspective, I'll be asking you, how should global governance actually address the migration of health workers?
Well, that's everybody's concern, okay? Let me start by saying that whenever I've also, you know, written some of these problems. The issue is this: when people will say everybody has the right to migrate, to go to anywhere he or she wants to.
To Japa.
You know, to Japa, okay, yeah, to Japa. So, and I totally agree. But what is happening is that there are some countries in the 90s and early 2000s, you know, that there used to be a joke, okay, that there were more Malawian doctors in the city of Birmingham in the UK than the whole of Malawi. There were more Zambian doctors in Manchester than the whole of Zambia. And these guys were trained, you know, in public universities, of course, giving government, funding and things like that. And they decided to migrate, to move. Okay, so there are very horrifying statistics about this. Movement of African health workers to Europe, North America, Australia. And it's documented by WHO. So at a point, these countries were having shortfalls, and they were actively recruiting. So that's the one I condemn. Okay, so nurses from Philippines, from other places. So they devised a visa scheme where you come in, you start working. So that's poaching. Why can't you train your own destiny? So that is condemnable. Okay, but the issue of who decides to leave or who decides to stay or whatever is much more complicated, because if I wake up one day and say, look, I want to go and live in the US, I want to Japan, how can you wear this thing? So what can happen is that if in some countries, if governments actually use their money, public funds to train them, then it raises an equitable issue, whether you have to work for a certain number of years, before you're allowed to move. Again, there are also issues. But WHO actually passed a non-binding resolution on recruitment of African health professionals. Is there, the World Health Assembly. So many of them have pushed back on that. Okay, since the passing of that resolution. But yes, it's a very complicated, situation. Otherwise, you train these doctors and nurses, and then they keep moving. And there's other aspects of healthcare, for instance, anesthetics and all of this. They're all part of the equation. So everybody's looking for, going to look for greener pastures. How do you address this? Some say, government should look into their welfare package. Maybe try to revise. I'm all for it, but how is it going to be done actually? Vis-a-vis the other sectors. That.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're right. But the one I condemn outright is where a country like UK or Australia or US for that matter, they devise a visa scheme, that is poaching these people. So you come in and just start working. That's wrong. That's
Okay, Prof, I want to take you back to there's something you said about traditional healing as is done in India.
Yes.
And of course, one of the things we do here is a prescription.
Yes.
How can sub-Saharan African governments integrate traditional healing systems into orthodox health policy without compromising safety?
No, but that's the
Because you just explained the very important thing happening in India.
Yes.
So how can it be done in sub-Saharan Africa?
Well,
without compromising safety.
Yes.
Because that's the key.
So that's the thing. Because over time, okay. Because yes, I agree with you. There are a lot of issues about the safety of what this now. What actually, the reason I got amazed about Ayurveda is we had I was appointed to this WHO committee on establishing the WHO Center for Traditional Medicine. So we're in India, and then we went to this Ayurveda, a clinic, hospital, a big hospital, and I saw the labs. I saw I was asking the chief medical director of that hospital, that Ayurveda hospital. So she said, look, we don't prescribe paracetamol here for pain. I said, so what? She said, no, they have Ayurveda medicine they give for pain. No patient is given paracetamol because they have Ayurveda equivalent, for that. Completely plant-based, so they have their lab, but this has to start somehow. It's not, something. So I agree with you, but the thing is that the tension, the dichotomy, the disconnect between the orthodox medicine and traditional medicine, is still very intense. Okay, it needs to be closed up. I think the federal government is also doing something about this. Not like that, but they've put in place proposals for quality control and make sure it's enforced. Because what we're talking about is that when people say African traditional medicine is not scientific, I laugh. It's 100% scientific. But that science doesn't mean that the same way experiment is done in a lab in the US or Europe or whatever, or the way Pfizer does their testing, So that's it. So whatever doesn't conform to that rigorous laboratory, Western laboratory standards, should not be dismissed as not being scientific.
Yes, I think I agree.
I have a friend of mine, my classmate from high school, he's a professor of pharmacy at Unilag. He's looking at this test now very closely.
Yes.
The African the uses of medicinal uses of African herbs.
Time what Allah was there's a pharmacist I met in Abuja, and he made claims to curing or managing COVID. They say he was fake. But instead of the trained pharmacist, etc., what decided to look at herbs. If you come to his house, he have
Yes.
all shades of plants.
Yes, so many of them.
And there are a lot of testimonies as to what he has been able to do.
Yeah.
No, but our patient, he said, look, we give them some herbal medicine, and in 2 weeks they want the result.
Yes.
It doesn't happen that way.
Yes.
Some you can use for 3 months before you begin to have the results.
Yes.
But you must have faith. So they use halfway, they run back to the orthodox. Okay, just two short questions before we just open the top lines. Reforms. What reforms are needed at the World Health Organization to give African member states a stronger voice in policy making? From your experience.
Well, we have an African now as DG, so and it's finishing very soon.
Okay.
Well, that was the first thing because 10 years ago, the argument was that no African has led WHO.
Now what is it?
So now he has done it now. So I think anytime from now they are going to start the process of electing his successor because it's done 10 years. On the 10 years from Ethiopia.
So what have they been able to do all these years?
I don't know.
No, 10 years, a decade.
Yes. So that's the first reform, and Africa has headed it. But you know what I said. I tell people sometimes, I don't know whether it's the right way to say it, but it's not just about who heads or where the person is from. Okay, you have to evaluate the program or the policies or the ideas the person has. We've seen over time, I'm talking about global institutions, we've seen over time where a DG comes from Europe or Asia or whatever, and people talk about the person as excellent because he did the right things. You might be an African, but the internal decision-making processes of these organizations might not allow you to do anything. You have all the ideas.
Your hands may be tired.
Yeah. So that's the distance. But I think the first thing that should happen, is WHO has 6 regional offices. Okay, and they are fairly independent. Okay, because those regional directors are elected directly by the countries in the region. Okay, so that allows you that autonomy. The DG in Geneva doesn't turn on the show. So, specifically for the question you asked about WHO, that's where things need to be done, the African region. Because during Ebola, a lot of people were saying that the African region of WHO didn't have the capacity. They're supposed to take the lead. So it goes to the issues we talked about, when poverty, bad governance, and all of that. So you have regional office in Google Brazzaville. So it's actually the least successful of the regions because a lot of health stuff, a lot of health issues are done in the regions. So when you have a regional office that is actually not, that is challenged, then vis-a-vis the magnitude of the problems that the continent is facing, then that's the first thing. So the question now is how do we, reform the African Regional Office of WHO? African governments should know where to put their money. Okay, it's not just flying in private jets and living in mansions, in a distance. This is require a lot of capital. We cannot be begging for simple things. Okay, the institute I'm running now in India, the UNESCO Institute, and I say this openly. It's open document. You can see it as a UNESCO website. Was fully capitalized by the Indian government. $3.5 million every year for 5 years. They've done it now for 15 years. So 3.5 million times 5 is how much? 3.5 million.
3 is 15.5.
Yeah.
17 point.
So in the 5-year time, 17 million. What is it to Nigeria? Can you go to UNESCO and say we want this kind of institute, because India puts the money in UNESCO, I'm there as director. We service UNESCO members, but they get a lot from it. I was telling you about the meeting I had with vice chancellors.
Yeah,
because it's there, we're located in India. So they always come and say, oh, let's do this, let's do this. That's foreign policy. That's the example I was trying to give. Okay, so this is something. What is $17 million to Nigeria? If you want to set up this, the same India asked WHO to set up the WHO wanted to set up the Global Center for Traditional Medicine. Indian Prime Minister came with both hands and said, please come. Give them land. I've given them now $50 million. If you see what they're building there, I served on that. We went to the place Jamnagar in Gujarat. Before I joined, I took on this job. So we were also on that committee that advised the DG, on the setting up of the Global Traditional Medical Center for WHO. It's going to be the global hub for every work WHO is doing. Huge. In fact, there's even a botanical garden where they want to, plant all those things. So how much is 50 million? And so that's how a country works for its interests internationally. I give these examples. I mean, these are simple examples.
Simple. It's just a tip of that. It's just a drop in the ocean of the kind of money that you hear one minister, one DG would have, You need to talk to African leaders. You need to talk to policymakers regarding globalization and public health. So, what would their message be to African leaders and policymakers?
Well, in the 21st century, I mean, the world is interdependent. You can't just hide. In your country, we've seen. I mean, if there's something that we'll be saying this, SARS, Ebola, COVID was just right on point. I told people that if I were in an international conference 10 years ago and had said something like, oh, one day there's going to be a virus that will shock the entire world, east, west, north, and south, they will look at you and say, this guy, this is crap. Okay, but the fact that societies, countries, people's services, these are all integrated. The borders have become porous. We travel. People travel like in billions, crossing national boundaries every year. So it's time anything can start in any part of the world, and then that's just the fact of globalization, and then it's going to travel and crisscross national boundaries to threaten populations in distant places. That's just the world we live in. So yesterday it was SARS, Ebola, today is COVID. Tomorrow is going to be something else. I don't know what it is, but these things are bound to happen. The most important question is whether lessons have been learned, from, we talked about the mistakes from Ebola, SARS before that, and then now COVID. So have we learned our lessons? And it goes to the question you're asking, how can we put in place resilient, health mechanisms, infrastructure, to protect our people, just in case, something like this happens in the future. So I think the policy-making community and the political community, I mean everybody, the professionals, unfortunately we don't have that discussion in Nigeria, okay? I don't see that happening. But that's where to start, because there's a lot of stakeholders, and we have to start a conversation that will become, agile and organic and responsive to these emerging and reimagined, global issues. So that would be my, my concluding remarks.
Okay, and that's a good point to do what? To leave this conversation. Thank you, Professor, for your insights. Thank you for a valuable contribution to this important conversation. To our listeners, those who are watching us online, Prof has, I hope I'm not helping you, Prof has agreed to be our guest on Tuesday on Freedom Square TV, and we'll be discussing a very important topic, which is actually what he's doing in India, education for peace and sustainable development. Using the institute where he is as an example, and then so you could still join us on our YouTube channel, because we'll be streaming live on YouTube and Facebook on Tuesday at 10 a.m. Other than that, Doc, Prof, thank you very much.
Thank you very
It's
much.
a pleasure. You could see the barrage of interventions, and that's how enthusiastic our listeners are.